Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome once more to Question Mark, the podcast. We're delighted today to have another wonderful guest on the show, who I will introduce in a few moments. But just to say, if you've never listened to this podcast before, this is an exploration of the greatest story ever told. That is the Gospel of Mark. And what we'll do is simply go from one episode to another. And as we're finding in this podcast, each episode is just so rich with meaning. It's wonderful. And it's not just about what it meant to the guys back then when it was written in the 1st century AD. What we're finding is that these episodes have amazing relevance for our current situation and for each one of us and as a society. So we're hopeful that you'll enjoy it. If you do follow us as well, and do write in with your comments and questions, because it is called Question Mark. And we love it when listeners write in with their own thoughts and questions about the passage we're looking at. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful new guest today. He is Stuart Bell, and he is someone that I've come across over the years and I've really got to admire and respect. He's a man of faith and a man of great heart in terms of his love for the church and his love for people. And Stuart, so good to have you on the show. As often, rather than me burbling on about who you are, would it be possible for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what's inspired you to come on the show and answer my request, and also, maybe how you know me as well?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's great to be with you today and to chat. I come from Lincoln. I was actually born in the city of Lincoln, and I'm the senior leader of Alive Church, which is a multi-site church, 7 locations. We've recently actually put smaller units in called communities, so we have 15 communities across Alive at present, which is quite exciting. And I also have the privilege of being the founding leader of the ground level network of churches, which is, I suppose you'd put it in the new church bracket, though it's not that new now, and around 80 churches across the UK connect in. So it's a relational connecting network. And so those are the 2 main things that I do. Also, of course, a husband. Irene's my wife. We have 3 children, and I have 5 grandchildren.
Wow, you're doing well. Very good. And tell us what you think about coming on this podcast in the first place.
Well, it's great to do this because we go back a number of years, actually, don't we? But when you came to Lincoln High Street, I find that a really memorable occasion because obviously, I was firstly impressed with anyone who's able to learn Mark's Gospel off by heart and perform it on the streets as people are passing by. And so I was there for that.
Yes.
Thoroughly enjoyed watching, seeing how you connected with people, but particularly how you handled, carrying the Gospel of Mark, which obviously through the years has been a very important book for you. So so to come and connect again and to chat through some of the passages, I thought that would be a great thing to do. And also I think perhaps we go back a number of years, perhaps not personally connecting, but with the people that we know from history and connecting points. When you contacted us, I was really pleased that we could have you over into what I believe is a great city of Lincoln.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's so kind of you. And I really did love coming up to Lincoln, and people there, yourself included, were so kind and hospitable and so supportive as well. I've got to say, a number of years have gone under the bridge, as it were, water under the bridge since then. And I don't know about you, but certainly for me, as I've studied this gospel again and again and rehearsed for performances, so much of its wealth has come to light, which I had only a vague conception of in those days. I'm so grateful, though, for those times that I was out on the high street doing that sort of stuff. So thanks.
Well, it's really interesting, Stefan, that before we connected, a number of years ago, I can't remember what conference it was perhaps Spring Harvest, and I remember being given Mark's Gospel and to share things from Mark's Gospel. And I remember I tackled on that day, I'm not in your league in terms of memorizing, but I remember going through a kind of the whole book in terms of the storyline, and just going through the storyline, encouraging people to enter into the emotions of each of the passages. So I was intrigued when you took it up a notch or two. So I've also loved Mark's Gospel, and of course, being a church pastor for years, and obviously wanting people to get into Bible reading, I would always say, well, start with Mark's Gospel. It's a bit shorter, it's nice and fast, it's clear. And if you want the storyline, start with Mark. So we're on the same page in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's listen to the passage in question. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see an actual production of I Am Mark. That's the play that I'm involved in, that Stuart's referred to. Or you can listen to my good friend Lucy Warner on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you're listening through those. So without further ado, the passage itself.
Jesus withdrew to the lake. And again, a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, from Jerusalem, Idumea, and all the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, Jesus had his disciples have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and they cried out, "You are the Son of God!" But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him.
So there it is, 3, 2, 1. So there it is, Stuart. I think that the first thing I normally ask a guest at this point is, well, what are your first thoughts?
Well, I think the first thoughts that come to me is the word crowds. And going through Mark's Gospel, I think Mark does tell us about crowds that gathered. So in Mark's Gospel, you get both the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And I also found it interesting that Mark gives details of the places where people came. They came presumably from all across the region, and some were Jews. Some came even 100 miles or so to be there.
Yes.
Some from Jerusalem, some from other regions, but I guess also from the Decapolis around the towns around, which would be perhaps Gentile and Jew. So this kind of picture that I think Mark is wanting us to discover is this is the world beginning to gather.
Absolutely.
And I actually connect that with the very first verse of chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It seems to me that the beginning of the gospel, Mark wants us to know this isn't just going to be confined to a few. This is going to be for the world.
Yes.
The other thought that came to me as I read those different places they came from, I connected that a little bit with Acts, the day of Pentecost, where on the day of Pentecost, and it's Luke writing, of course, with Acts, but as he goes through the list of places, again, the whole idea of the different languages, different cultures, etc. And so I think here Mark wants us to see that this isn't just something small that's happening. This is big news. And it's good news, of course, the gospel. And it's for all people, both Jews and Gentiles. So I think that was my first thought. The two thoughts I had were crowds, and then of course there was the healing and deliverance side, which is very big as well through Mark's gospel. So that might lead me on to defining what the gospel is.
I think that would be really helpful, because I think that's where Mark is, isn't it? In the whole of the gospel, it's always there, that sense that he wants to teach us something. What is the gospel? Who is Jesus?
Yeah, well, I've always, I was brought up that the gospel is kind of words. But the more I've gone on in the faith, it is not just words. It is power, it's demonstration. And actually the gospel is that there's a king, a kingdom. We talk about the gospel of the kingdom, don't we? So thinking of who Jesus is, he's not just come to be a teacher. He's not just come to give us good advice, but he's come as the savior of the world, and he's demonstrating his rule and his reign, which in this passage you see over demonic forces and unclean spirits. In other places you see it. In fact, the same chapter, there's this discussion, isn't there, of where Jesus' power comes from, Jesus and Beelzebub passage, which I was kind of pleased you didn't give me. But also you see him carrying authority over nature, the stilling of seas, the dealing with demonic forces, and the healing of the sick. Which again, I would take back to that Isaiah 61, that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the King, and he's come as a liberator. And for me, I would connect Mark right into the whole Bible narrative of right the way, whether it's from Genesis through the Pentateuch or through the Exodus, the big story of God bringing people out of bondage, out of captivity, out of Egypt, if you like, and into the promised land. And of course, Jesus is the fulfillment of all that Old Testament prophetic activity, where he is the promised Christ, the Son of the living God.
Yeah, exactly, as Mark introduces the gospel at the beginning. And, I'm so glad you said that, Stuart, because that really does encapsulate all the podcasts that we've heard so far in this series. It's about his identity, not just a good teacher, as you said, not just a loving man. He was both of those things, not even just a prophet, but a king. And actually, the implication of what you're saying is, it's not just a king for back then. He's our king. And I'm just wondering, you did mention quite rightly a lot about the biblical background to this identification of Jesus. Absolutely. But for those who are listening, and there are some I know who haven't really got that biblical background, and maybe thinking to themselves, okay, what's that mean? What's that mean for me? Would you be able to put that into words that they would appreciate?
Yes, I think that many today do see Jesus as a good man. They see him as a good teacher with great things to share. There's a lot of respect out there for Jesus. But I think as it was in the day, the moment it begins to have implications on a person's life with regard to change that needs to take place and transformation, then it becomes a bit of an obstacle. And I suppose what I would say is that a person comes to faith, yes, by looking into, trying to discover. I think Jesus' teaching encourages people to delve deeper, to think more, and his teaching is kind of a bit bit difficult unless somebody's grappling with it and looking for it. But I do believe that this message is relevant today because Jesus, as the King, is able to transform people today, and that his message of salvation, which must not just be limited to teaching, I believe that anyone who turns to Christ, the promise is that as we come to him, we can have a transformed life, a new beginning. And also, of course, New Testament says that God has given the Holy Spirit that leads us into truth. And so I believe that Jesus can't be locked up into historic books.
Yes.
And of course, we'd have to go to the end of Mark and other Gospels to see that he rose from the dead, that he is alive, and that he is not the God of the dead. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that Jesus has always been relevant through every century and is relevant today. And so it's interesting. We've been taking our staff through a bit of church history lately to actually show that this is a big story, and it goes through history, and men and women have given their lives through the centuries because this message has impacted every generation.
Yeah.
And so I would say that anyone who is interested, who's asking questions, I would encourage to read the scriptures.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to just have a really open conversation with Jesus. And, you know, the Bible actually says anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That exodus, that coming out of the past and into something new, I think isn't just for a nation, it's for individuals and anyone who turns to Christ. And that's why I love hearing stories of people whose lives have been transformed. So anybody thinking about these things, I think it's worth reading the scriptures, and it's worth listening to people's stories, you know, people who claim that Jesus is relevant to them today. And there are a few million of those across the earth.
Indeed there are.
Yeah,
Plenty of evidence around. And I love what you're saying, and about the individual, about society. I mean, if I could, you know, maybe put in my own penny's worth, I think for me, why this story is still relevant, and it goes back to what you were saying about liberation earlier, because if we follow through the logic of what you were saying, if this Bible passage is put in its context, God had to liberate humanity and the world. And what was he liberating it from? Well, he's liberating it from evil, basically, and disease and suffering and death and injustice and oppression and violence. Now, we see some of that, a lot of that still around today, but this story makes a huge claim, doesn't it? That God in human form came to rescue us, and rescue is available for each of us from a life where it's not full of peace. Actually, it's full of division and contention and conflict within as well as with other people, and society at large is full of trouble and division, all those things that we've just been talking about. But Jesus can make a difference. He can change, as you say, transform not only individuals' lives, but cultures as well. And that's what's so exciting. So yeah, for me, if I was to answer that, my own question, it would say this idea of a king coming to rescue humanity and the world is hugely relevant, not just for that time, but for ours.
Yes, because so many people are looking for solutions, looking for answers, and some look to political answers, and others look to other things. But I think Jesus is the one that can deal with the inner stuff that is hard to define. The Bible calls sin a sort of a selfishness, a rebellion against God. We live in a flawed world, a world that's been corrupted, and we're all a part of that. And so we do need a savior. We need someone who will pull us out of that stuff and give us a brand new life, and connect us with the creator who made us, you know, and his intentions for this world are not what we have today. It's been marred, it's been hurt, it's been corrupted. But Jesus, the Son of God, came to put that right. And it's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
And it's such a wonderful story that it has power to change lives. And so, you know, we last weekend, we had a thing called Make a Difference, where we connect with various organizations. And one of those is an organization called Bethel. And it's ex-addicts, people that have been wrapped up with heroin addictions, alcohol addictions. And the beautiful thing is we really partner with them, because whenever you hear one of their stories, they've tried everything. You know, they've tried government, they've tried health, they've tried all kinds of ways to break free. But their testimony or their story is that when they came to Jesus, their lives were completely changed, addictions were broken, etc. And though that's the sort of extreme story, and it helps you with your faith when you see a radical conversion. I mean, like the Apostle Paul, for instance, a radical conversion, one of those, you know, shining light affairs, you know, it's really good for your faith. But then I was brought up in a Christian home. My parents, you know, took me to church from day one. But I had to make that decision, recognizing how far short I fell of the standards that God sets. And you know, I remember as a 14-year-old responding to a message where I opened my heart in a simple way to Jesus. So whether it's an extreme person who's, you know, gone into all kinds of bad stuff, or whether it's just an ordinary, in our terms, person, Jesus has died for every human being on planet Earth, and there's an opportunity for all to receive him.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe for some who are listening, it's difficult to see this. Actually, I would be honest and say that. But it's something about the stories that have a power. You mentioned stories of people like those people in Bethel and others, millions of them.
Yeah.
They have the ring of truth about them. But this story as well, there's something about its the very words of this story which has a resonance, a power, which can open up people's minds and hearts and help them to make the decision that you made all those years ago, Stuart.
I'm kind of finding even the thoughts of crowds a helpful one at this time, because after the last 18 months, a number of Christians are coming through it and saying, you know, we need to simplify. I'm one of them that say we need to simplify, not just rush about with our programs doing lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But there is a tendency, if we're not careful, to then make this gospel just small for me and my little community and, you know, my little contribution. And I love Mark's Gospels. This is, yes, it is for that. It is for every community. It's for our families. It's for our friends. It's for our relationships. But actually, it's still a message the crowds need to hear.
Yeah.
And that's why I think as churches come through, I would encourage that we don't just say, well, let's do small stuff. Let's just retreat. I think it is time that the church proclaims, you know, to everyone this good news message. And it shouldn't be confined just to church buildings, should it? It's everyday life. It's going out into the world, sharing this good news.
Yeah, well, I'm inspired by what you say. I can't help but reflect on this personally and thinking about all the I Am Mark performances I'm hoping at one stage to be able to do. It is about drawing people to watch something, to hear something as a crowd. And it's amazing what kind of impact that can have.
We kind of get a real inspiration and faith-lifting crowds, actually. I mean, we've had an annual event for 40 years, actually. We celebrated the 40th year in August of grapevine celebrations and one events where, you know, through the years, thousands of people have gathered on, would you believe, Lincolnshire Showground, which is quite a thing. So even in rural Lincolnshire, we've managed to get at one point 12,000 people together for a few days of celebration. But what's interesting about that is sometimes in the crowds, you can do more than just in little local church settings. There is an inspiration when crowds gather to worship, for instance. I know people that have been to various parts of the world where there are huge crowds that gather. And, you know, that prayer, corporate prayer, has a different dimension sometimes when there are big crowds. And I remember my whole attitude towards church changed as I read the story of Pentecost in Acts, where it talks about, you know, 3,000 were saved. Because I would say that my idea of church, the ideal church, was 120-ish, you know, because you can relate well, and I still think that's a good number, etc.
Yeah.
But I remember when that revelation came to me, you know, kind of our 120, we're in an upper room, but then what if the Holy Spirit comes? You know, what if 3,000 are saved? And I do think in the UK, we do need to lift our eyes more to the implications that God so loved the world, you know, and that if he loved the world, we've got to do all that we can to see the crowds coming to faith.
Yeah.
And sometimes in days of revival, you see that. Other times you've got to dig deep, haven't you? And with the few. Yeah. But ultimately, this gospel works and has done through the centuries.
Yeah, it's brilliant. That's so inspiring. Thank you, Stuart. I mean, going back to the detail of the passage, you know, I so agree with you about the idea that Mark has an agenda, if you like, in mind in mentioning all these places. He's saying Jesus is for everyone, the world. And actually, as I think about it, it's not the first time he mentions crowds coming to him from different locations. And it's almost like he's trying to make a point. And the more I read Mark, the more I realize that geography is really important. So it's fascinating how the stories that Mark has picked to illustrate Jesus's ministry, they are seemingly equally divided between Jesus in Gentile territory and Jesus in Jewish territory. It's almost like he goes backwards and forwards across the Sea of Galilee between the two.
I mean, even when I went to Israel last year, I'd not seen it before, but I think it's right, isn't it? The feeding of the 5,000, its location pretty much Jewish connectedness, but the 4,000, the other side of the lake, more Gentile connection.
That's right.
And yeah, it is interesting, and you have to just read the detail a bit, don't you, to get the full implications. Because I remember when I was at school, my religious education teacher said, you know, well, was it 5,000 or was it 4,000? What they didn't say was, actually, it's in the same book. So there were 5,000 and there were 4,000.
Yeah.
You have to read the book, don't you?
You have to read the book. You have to read the book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that whoever does that passage, when we get to those passages, will remember what you say there, Stuart. Really helpful. So in terms of, you know, other questions that might come to people's mind as they listen to that passage, you mentioned about healing, didn't you? And you mentioned about demons. And I've actually had a couple of questions come in about those. So if you didn't mind, this is from one listener who wrote, the passage talks about people coming from many places, some a long distance away, and it also mentions that many people were healed. So was healing just a way for Jesus to attract a crowd to hear his teaching? What do you think?
Well, I think that I would say the attraction of seeing a gospel that works, that's tangibly seen, is attractive, and I can understand. I mean, if we have healing evangelists through in church, you get bigger crowds than if I stand up and try and share. And there is something attractive about that. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but I don't see Jesus, well, we'll heal some people to then bring the teaching. This is the kind of precursor for the teaching. I see it as a holistic, the gospel has to do all the freeing.
Yes.
Physically, spiritually, emotionally, in every way.
Yes.
In order that the gospel really is the gospel. It's not just a change of thinking.
Yes.
It radically impacts our lives. And I know we're nervous in the West to talk about healing, and there's a lot of theological discussion as to can we expect healing for today. I personally believe we can. I believe that it's in the gospel, and I believe that there is not just the announcing of good news, but the demonstrating that it's true. So often Jesus would make a statement like, your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
And then in order that you know I've got the authority for that, get up and walk, which is the reverse of what the question is saying. In other words, the teaching was there first and then the demonstration of that. So I don't think we could view healings and miracles as a technique to get crowds. I think it is part and parcel of the good news message that he brought. And again, wrapped up in all those prophecies of the Old Testament that declared a Messiah would come, who was going to radically turn everything around.
Yes.
You know, your sins will be forgiven, but your bodies will be healed. So healing, deliverance, and it is interesting. And I gave a quick read through only yesterday to just get the feel again. There are so many mentions of healings and deliverances, and yes, the teaching is there, but it's all intermingled through the storyline.
Yeah.
And so it's a rather wonderful thing that Jesus will feed 5,000, but then will teach the 5,000, but then will feed them as well. It's kind of the full gospel, and and so. And yet, I mean, I've got one or two friends who have seen some remarkable healings, and I do believe that it's a crowd puller.
Interesting.
You know, when people see power, and it can be a negative thing if people, because some would say, I would imagine a lot of people that came on that day were just intrigued.
Yeah.
You know, is this stuff true? Will we see a miracle?
Yeah.
And I have to say that it'd be a great thing, wouldn't it, to be in a synagogue and see a shriveled up hand suddenly take shape before your eyes. And I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff, which is the story before this, where, and it's interesting that Jesus, he's in the synagogue, and when he's in the synagogue, he gets the aggro. And he often retreats to the seashore, doesn't he? And that's a nice picture as well of getting a bit of fresh air from all that religious stuff.
Yes.
And it was in that setting. It's interesting. The crowds weren't knocking at the synagogue's doors. They were coming out into the open spaces where Jesus was able to be himself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And, you know, it reminds me of church history a bit there, Stuart. I'm thinking of people like John Wesley, who didn't go to churches and did his preaching, but he was out in the countryside where the people were. There's something really special.
He actually, because Epworth is just up the road from us in Lincoln. And, you know, I've been to the church in Epworth, and there's the grave of Samuel Wesley outside in the yard, and John preached from there because he wasn't allowed in the church. But more people gathered around him as he preached the gospel than could have got in the church. And I think church history does show that this is true.
Yeah. And, you know, in all of what you're saying about liberating the whole person, which I think you explained wonderfully, actually, so clearly. What came across for me, though, was this idea of the motivation. And the motivation was love, wasn't it?
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
saw the suffering of these people, those who were needing deliverance or those who needed healing. And it was purely out of love, not a technique. So he can get a good hear from these guys, but actually he saw and helped them. That's his motivation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, motivation of absolute love, compassion for people. One occasion it talks about him seeing the crowds as though they were sheep without a shepherd, and you feel something of his heart for people.
And that for me is perhaps one of the misunderstandings that go along when you talk to people about Jesus, that almost as if they think, if one allowed Jesus to be in one's life in the way we've described, it's almost like you're being taken over and there's something that is maybe detrimental to you. But actually Jesus's heart, and I think we discover as Christians as we grow, is one of pure love, isn't it? And that's the most amazing thing about it.
And it was sacrificial love that actually took him to the cross, as we know, and he gave himself for us, which is remarkable.
Yeah. It's enough to crumble anyone's defenses, I think. That's brilliant. Thank you. I've got another question. Actually, it's about the people who were there, who were possessed in some way. And the question goes like this. In the passage, it says that whenever the impure spirits saw Jesus, they cried out, "You are the Son of God." However, he told them not to tell others about him. Why didn't he want people to know that he was the Son of God? Surely that would have made his ministry, his teaching, even more effective, because more people would come and find him. I think it might be worth, before we hear your thoughts about that, just to clarify the terms of that question from the listener. When that phrase "Son of God" is used, it means the Messiah. It means the Christ. That's an expected deliverer who the Jewish nation were long been promised. So when the demons called out, "You are the Son of God," that's what it actually means. Although it does have the implication of divinity too.
Yeah, well, I think there'd be a fair bit of debate on what was actually happening at that particular time. I did read somewhere that where a person uses the full name of someone else, it's a power mechanism. And bear in mind, if these are impure or evil spirits known for lying, then would one want advertising from that source?
Yes.
However, and then others would say that there was a holding back on the revelation of who he was because his time had not yet come.
Yeah.
In other words, there was a timing of God for the fullness of that coming out. So the demon's words also, I just made a note there, the demon's words could have triggered rebellion and uprisings. Because there was in that era, messiahs, and this idea of other deliverers coming. And I think the clarity and the purity of who Jesus was, he was very strict that he didn't want any proclamation from that source.
Yeah.
It was the Father that needed to proclaim, "This is my Son."
Yes.
I'm pleased with him.
Which happens in the gospel. Yes.
Yeah, and it was almost an affront to get a revelation, even though it was true.
Yeah.
But to get it from that source for the people, I think would bring huge confusion about Messiah, deliverer, etc.
Yeah.
Those would be my first thoughts about that.
That's fascinating.
Because he on a number of occasions forbids them to publicize, doesn't he?
He does.
And to speak. And yeah, I would think back to that thought that if names are used, I'm not sure I'll be able to explain this brilliantly well because I thought about it just recently. But if somebody's being interviewed by an interviewer on the news and they are being questioned really strongly. What I've noticed is if a person who's responding uses the name of the interviewer.
Yes.
It's a little power mechanism.
Yes.
To try and get control.
Yeah.
And there may be a hint of that as well, that, you're the Son of God. Could be some kind of evil mechanism to try to control the situation, rather than be the underdog that the demons clearly were.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've not explained that too well, but
no, I think you have. That was a brilliant analogy, actually, because I think even in these days, and the reason why I'm saying these days will hopefully become clear, but even in these days, that the idea of a name having a certain power in the context that you've described, it makes a lot of sense. But in those days, I think, I could be wrong about this, but I understand that the name of someone, it carried a lot more in terms of its authority
and
sense of its power. So I totally get that idea that the demons in this case were looking to somehow remain in control of the situation. After all, Jesus was coming and trying to deliver them from, cast them out of these people.
Yeah, perhaps in their naive way, wanting, perhaps they'll be kind to us if we, because they're going to be cast out, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
The clash with evil, which of course in today's world is fascinating because, and even in some Bible commentaries, there would be a dulling down on demonic things. And in today's world, I mean, even on the news, something of this order, someone put in prison recently, and it's a difficult thing for church leaders and pastors to identify with. We perhaps have to phrase things a little sensitive. We have to talk about, I mean, everybody acknowledges there's evil in our world. It manifests itself in various ways, and we would want to see evil vanquished. We would want to see mountains moved. And so we might not be too wise all the time, talking about demonic powers, etc. Though clearly in the Gospels, Jesus is very clear about that. But we just have to be, I suppose, careful as to how we phrase some of these things in today's settings.
If I could put you on the spot slightly on that, are you personally in favor of the idea of an evil existing in the first place, and that I guess Jesus's role is to confront that?
Yes, I do. I personally believe that. I do believe that. And again, this is why in at the present time, there's a number of people would really push hard on the God is love aspect.
Yeah.
That would, love wins kind of idea.
Yeah.
And I do believe love wins, but I do believe that that evil needs to be vanquished and dealt with, and that evil power is real, and people can be dominated by evil power. And sometimes the phraseology of making sure people aren't fearful of these things perhaps is wise. But I genuinely do believe that that Jesus came into the world to destroy the devil's work, and there is the devil's work. There is an opposing force to the powers of Christ. And so deliverance, you have to say from what,
Yes.
what are we delivered from and to? That of the old Exodus picture, they came out of Egypt and into the promised land. And I think there needs to be a coming out of evil, and behavior and stuff has to shift and change by the work of Christ. That revolutionizes us and changes us, transforms us.
That's brilliant. That's really well described. Very sensitively, I think, as well. Thank you. Can I ask another question that's come from a listener?
Yeah.
This one's about the boat, actually. I'm just going to remind myself about what the passage says. It says, because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him, to keep the people from crowding him. And this listener wrote, and it's the first time, honestly, although I've read this many, many times, it's the first time I realized what that meant, that little section, because she wrote about how it seems as if Jesus wanted to protect himself, because there were so many people crowding against him physically that he had to have a boat ready just in case he needed to escape. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that one when I read it. I'd not really thought about that before either. And it does, from the words, suggest that there was, the crowding in on Jesus could have harmed him.
Yeah.
And they were pushing and shoving, etc. And of course, Mark it's very important we understand that, yes, Jesus is the Son of God, but he's also human and thoroughly human, and therefore being surrounded by crowds that are wanting to touch him, etc., then presumably, and let's face it, the disciples were minders on occasions, weren't they? And push people away and all the rest. But there could be another, this could have been a small boat ready in case.
Yeah.
Or it could have been a small boat, because in chapter 4, the next chapter, it says the crowd was so large he got into a boat and sat out in the lake and preached from the boat, which is in the very next chapters.
Yes.
So you could argue, and the scriptures don't tell us, so we've got to do a bit of guesswork on this, I suppose. But he could have said, because the people are pressing and they're all around me, I need some space. And in the very next chapter, he uses a boat, pushes out slightly and preaches from the boat.
Yeah.
So it could be that if the crowds get so great and I can't get, across to people, well, maybe I can use a small boat to speak from.
Indeed.
Because it does emphasize a small boat, doesn't it?
It does.
Not the fishing boats that normally were used for going across the waters.
Right. Interesting.
So I don't think we can say categorically either way, because it does appear that the crowd were pressing hard, and it's in that context, have a boat ready.
Yeah.
But both would work, actually, that if Jesus thought his work was not through and needed to give attention to the people with teaching, then that boat could have been used to get away from the crowd somewhat, but to continue the teaching from the small boat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for putting it in context with the next bit of the story.
So really. I might opt for number 2, that it was
interesting. Yeah.
To get him out from the crowd, but still to minister. If it weren't that, then I would say Jesus would never waste opportunities with I don't think he would just leave that crowd to themselves. I think there would be, he would want something achieving with that crowd rather than just disappearing off the scene.
I think if she were here, our questioner might slightly disagree with you, because I think the impression I got, and I'll read the question out now, is that she implies that Jesus could be kind of concerned for life and limb, actually. Anyway, let me read the question, because she does go on to ask something really interesting.
Yeah.
She says, after seeking to avoid the crowds, perhaps, he decides, well, no, he definitely did try to avoid the crowds from an earlier point. Sorry, I should have said that. He decides to spend time with them with an emergency escape in place.
Okay.
Rather than just send them away, he responds in compassion and brings healing. It brings healing. In other words, I think what she's trying to say is Jesus withdrew. That's what it says at the beginning of the passage. Withdrew suggests that he wanted to be by himself. But crowds came to him anyway, so much so that he was in physical danger. Yet he does keep offering them his love and his healing and so forth. And therefore she's saying, did Jesus change his mind, change his plan? And what does this say about how God interacts with people, with us? Is this an analogy of what happens when we go to him in prayer? Is this a God who will actually change his plans when we pursue him and present him our needs? And indeed, she says, do we also need to push forward to touch him and receive our healing? In other words, do we have to be as insistent as these people to receive? Does our God who comes to us also want us to pursue him as well?
Yeah, I could go with all of that. I think there's some really good comments there about what I would say is, because I think there isn't a definitive answer on this because we're not really sure, but that would make a lot of sense and is a good way of looking at things. And I do think that the persistence of people of faith attracts Jesus, which would he change his mind on things? Yes, as a human being, he would respond and react to various settings and particularly to faith.
Yes.
And you see a number of occasions where that happens.
Yeah.
The other side, when I think of Mark's gospel, it's so fast in its movement. You know, some have called it the go gospel, and the word immediately happens often. So it's almost he went here, he went there, then he did this, then he did that. And the withdrawing part, I do believe the withdrawing to the solitary place was very important in Jesus' ministry, as well as with the crowds, because it was the re-energizing moments. It was the time with the Father. It was the prayer before. It was the preparation before the crowd.
Yeah.
And therefore, the withdrawing, yes, it could be he needed space and he was tired. All of those things I think are relevant. But I think also there was that desire before just rushing into ministry. There was always that time with the Father, just the clarity of who he was and the re-energizing of his life as he moved on. And sometimes in Mark, you get a withdrawal, but then moves on very quickly. And therefore the timings of these things and the pace of these things seems really fast in Mark's gospel.
Yes.
But there may have been space before the people came, and it may have not been quite as dramatic as that.
And I think you're right. I don't think Mark would pretend, if he were here today talking with us, that he'd recorded every single episode in Jesus's ministry. And what we have a selection of details here that they may not have followed bang, 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 bang immediately after one another.
And that withdrawing also was from the synagogue reactions, wasn't it? Because right at the end, the Pharisees and what does it say? The Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they may kill Jesus. And then it says Jesus withdrew with his disciples. Yeah. So in a sense, he's withdrawing from the aggravation of the religious. And now he's in a new setting and large crowds start to follow him.
I wouldn't, sorry, go on.
No, that's fine.
I was going to say, I wouldn't necessarily say that Jesus was in fear of his life and that withdrawing was because he wanted to avoid being killed. But I would say perhaps that he did want to avoid being killed because he was going to be killed. I think we can say that Jesus had an idea. He had a strong idea that this was going to be part of his his sacrifice for humanity. He knew this. But there was a time for that. And it wasn't now. There was more to do before then.
Very definitely. I think that timing thing was always very much, Jesus was clear about the build up towards that time.
Yes.
But he knew his time wasn't yet until, if you like, the delivering of the gospel, you know, into all that he, the Father was calling him to do was very important. I mean, that's really the period.
I did a performance a couple of days ago, and I came to that bit in the gospel where Jesus says to his disciples at Gethsemane, the time has come. So there was a time, the moment, when he knew he had to give himself to death.
Yes.
Amazing. Amazing. Wow. Stuart, it's been absolutely wonderful. I'm just wondering, is there anything else that's come up for you that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I just think the beauty of the Bible is that there are so many shades and colors of possibility, and you know, and some of the things we're saying, we're not sure whether it was exactly that or something similar, but what we do get is a thread of a knowledge of who Jesus is, and a revelation that unfolds for us. And and I suppose I do think, again, Mark's gospel points to what I began with, or what we were talking about earlier, that it's not just Jesus the teacher, but Jesus is the King of glory over all of creation, over even the fallen darkness issues of our world, over powers and authorities. And, you know, we read a bit further with some of the theology of that Paul brings, of powers and power bases in our world. And yet Jesus is the King of all, and has been given a name that's higher than any other name. And so I think that those few verses that we've just chatted about, it's amazing. You can spend an hour looking at a few verses, talking about various possibilities and shades of opinion, most of which I think are very valid. Certainly the questions that were asked today, I thought were really thoughtful and provoking. And again, we so easily polarize, don't we, into, you know, I believe in the sovereignty of God, I believe in the free will of man. And I've always been somewhere down in the middle and said it's both. And you do get, you know, did Jesus change his mind on things? I think the answer is yes, but is Jesus always in control? I think the answer to that is yes. And is Jesus going to fulfill his ministry? The answer is yes. And it must have been wonderful to be on the seashore, in the crowds, seeing the Son of God at work.
Yes.
Bringing to a fallen world where people are begging and sick, who now are being restored and healed, people that are fearful are being brought hope, people who are in poverty are being given food. It's the full gospel. And I think today we must not limit our faith to just churches. It's the King of the kingdom, and the kingdom involves the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, every sphere of society. And we need Christians that believe this good news message, that both live it out in personal devotion to Christ, and where appropriate, demonstrate it as we pray for the sick, which we want to do, and as we share the good news of Jesus, and tell people their sins really can be forgiven and they can know God. Well, that's where the gospel always takes us, isn't it? Because it's good news. It's good news physically, spiritually, emotionally, in every dimension of life. Jesus is the Savior of the world, and he is the Lord also.
I was going to ask you if there were people listening or watching this podcast who haven't ever read Mark's Gospel and know not that much about Jesus, what would be your parting message to them? And I'm now guessing it would be what you've just said.
Yes, it would be as simple as I could state it, because I believe a child can do this. It's not to do with how clever we are, and it's when we recognize our need. And we've sometimes talk about a God-shaped void in our souls, that we know there's more to life than this kind of stuff. And I would just say that if there is an acknowledgement of need, that Jesus is the answer for every need, and he's only a prayer away. Wow. And anyone who just honestly and openly opens their hearts, and even if it's sometimes, Lord, if you're there, reveal yourself, and in his grace and his goodness, he usually does, if our hearts are sincere and right. And I believe that if there are people that are connecting today who are facing health issues, finance issues, marital issues, relational issues, it sounds a bit simplistic to say this, but I genuinely believe it, that Jesus is the answer for the world today, and is the answer for every need that a human being could ever have. And he's only a prayer away.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stuart Bell, for what you shared. It's been amazing. Bless you.
Thank you very much, sir. God bless.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, make sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. Join us and our special guest next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.